I think it's very relevant to your focus on advancing human health, because the model that we're using in this reincarnation experiment, which I'll explain in a little bit more detail, really is focused on a psychophysical model of human development. And obviously it's the interrelationship between one's emotional state and one's physical state and one's personality that determines our health. Let me explain at the beginning what the reincarnation experiment is, because I think everyone has heard of the concept of reincarnation, but they're usually thinking in sort of spiritual terms or ethereal terms that don't have much to do with our daily lives and the reality of how we live today's lifetime. It's something that happened in the past and we're somehow connected to it, but we don't know what that really means. We have, before starting the reincarnation experiment, done a review of the most varied kinds of research into reincarnation, and we discovered that in the best cases that have been developed by people like Ian Stevenson, who worked on this for 40-something years at the University of Virginia, and other people who are looking at a sort of a scientific model, have discovered a certain set of factors that appear to be a part of the legacy that each of us inherits when we're born, that can be connected to specific prior lives. And so what we decided to do is to determine which of these factors could be measured empirically to meet a scientific standard, and to develop a full picture, or as full as it can be developed, of what is involved actually in reincarnation. So that experiment then has proceeded, starting off with what we call a meta-analysis, looking at a variety of different cases, identifying the factors that seem to be present in these past life cases, and combining them, synthesizing them into a measurable set of parameters that we look at. Physical, biometric material, and also psychological, emotional, mental factors that seem to be involved. And then, as we developed that model, we reached out to other scientists to get concepts from biology and genetics and evolutionary theory and physics, the people who are working on the edges of science, to understand the multidimensionality of the universe and how consciousness is embedded in, or maybe to say it more correctly, how matter and energy is embedded in consciousness. So these new concepts in science gave us a foundation, which we call this psychoplasm. Psychoplasm, you could call it the soul genome if you would like, because soul is sort of the traditional term that we use for this sort of eternal, transcendent aspect of the human being. But to try to be scientific, we wanted to use a term, as most scientists use Latin or Greek to come up with a term, and we sort of moved on from the word that Ian Stevenson used, which was psychophore, which was a container that carried forward these traits and attributes that he had discovered in children. And so we said, it's really more than a container. It's like a cell. It has a membrane, and it has all the parts in it too. So we use the term psychoplasm, which simply means the container and the elements that comprise the soul. And this is the concept. So we're now collecting evidence, doing statistical analyses, using biometric science, photo identification, DNA sequencing, personality tests, psychological tests, etc., to compare two lifetimes. Health is an integral process. It involves our emotions, our physical body, our environment, our way of thinking about ourselves, all of these factors, and they are integral. So the reason that we can find connections between previous lives, or I should say alleged previous lives, because we can't say 100% that this is exactly a past life identification and so on, but to the best of our ability we can say this is likely to be a past life connection that we've discovered. We go back to the work of Freud and Jung and Brewer and others, more than 100 years ago, when they discovered that children and young people suffered from physical symptoms, from psychological symptoms, that they, in their regression process that was developed at that time to childhood, they discovered that when those memories and patterns that, from their point of view, had developed in early childhood, had an effect on the individual's health. I mean, you had from things as simple as asthma to a total nervous breakdown. Almost a psychotic kind of episode might occur, and there was no explanation in the current environment or the current situation. So the early use of hypnosis for regression discovered that this cathartic release that comes to the individual patient or client happens when real, authentic, embedded, forgotten energies are discovered and exposed. So what's happened in past life regression research over the last 30 plus years is the same process works, except that you're not going back to childhood. You're going back to connect a symptom today with a possible event in a previous lifetime. And there's so many cases of this that the literature is filled as you read different books on reincarnation. But let's just take an example, which is really one of the first ones that came to light, was with Jungian analyst Roger Wilder back in the 1970s. He had a client who was almost in a catatonic state. I mean, was totally immobilized, unable to take care of herself, if it happened to be a woman, physically, and who could not do her work in terms of her artistic career that had become totally blocked. Discovering that there had been a possible previous lifetime as an artist, which was a total failure, ended in some suicide attempts. The person in that previous lifetime was unable to care for her mother and her family members who needed her help, and it turned out to be a disastrous end to that life. Here we have the person living today who is also expressing, because in the reincarnation research that we are doing and with the psychoplasm model, we're finding that we bring not only those physical challenges and tensions and so on, but we bring our creative talents. So here's this person, a very creative artist, able to earn a wonderful living in this lifetime, and yet being held down by the memories of that previous life, fearing that she was going to fail her mother in this lifetime again, that she was going to have to end her own life because of her lack of a capability to get it all together. And when she discovered this possible previous life, the cathartic experience happened, and she was able to release this fear, this sense of immobilization, and there was a healing, psychosomatic healing, and also a psychological healing. And so it's this combination that's involved here. There have been people who have had limbs that didn't function. All of a sudden, in the middle of a successful career as a musician, someone's arm becomes frozen, not able to play the violin anymore. Where did that come from?